everyone, my name is Bella and you're watching Diamond Painting Reviews by Jene.
Hello everyone, and again it's Jene here, and I hope you liked the opening of the video. That was Little Bella, and I found this new app. I thought it was fun, and let me know what you think, because I thought it was kind of cute. Actually, when I was playing with it, I was laughing so hard at one point I thought I was going to pee my pants. But anyway, so for those of you that are new to the channel, a big welcome and howdy. And for all of my subscribers, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. A big happy new year, and always remember to stay safe and stay healthy, which is the most important thing. 2020, goodbye, because I am so looking forward to 2021. Nothing could be worse than what we went through last year. So hopefully 2021 brings you and your family the best of everything. So by saying that, everyone, grab your whips and grab something to drink, because today is New Year's Eve. My beverage today is going to be twisted tea. Yes, it is so good. Anyway. So if I sound a little funny as I go along, you know I've had a little too many. No, I'm just kidding. That was my first one, and I actually haven't drank that much of it. So I thought I would share with you some stories of my childhood with my grandparents. And I had brought up my grandparents in my last WIP Chat, but just very briefly, my grandparents meant the world to me. And I know that they meant a lot to my sisters as well. When we were growing up, we were raised in Southern California, in the Santa Ana, Orange County area. And when our school broke out for the summer, my grandparents would fly us from LAX to the SeaTac airport, which is right in between Seattle and Tacoma. And that was the highlight of our year. We always looked forward to that. And usually when we flew, we were quite young, and at that time we should have had an escort with us, but I think my grandmother, who was the one that would book the flights, I think she kind of fibbed a little bit about our ages. And usually when we would land in Seattle, it was probably around 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. So they would come pick us up, and we would get our stuff together. They would usually take us out to dinner, and it was always the brown cow. Have you guys ever had one of those favorite hamburger joints that just cooked the best hamburger in the world? You know, it's one of those hamburger joints that you just can't forget. And it wasn't like McDonald's. It was like one of those old mom and pop places. Oh my God, did they ever have the best hamburgers? And they would cook up their onions. So you could either have raw onions or you could have carameled onions. And oh man, anyway, they'd always take us to the brown cow for dinner. So by the time we got to their place, it was about 8 o'clock at night. At that point, we had to unpack. We had to get ready for bed. They always made sure every night that we brushed our teeth, and we would get in bed. The next morning, I would wake up, and the first thing I would do was I would come out of the bedroom, and they had 3 steps that would go down to the living room. And I would go down all 3 steps, and then I would sit on the 3rd step, and I would just take it all in, that I'm here, I'm with my grandparents, and I just would just look everywhere. It was a feeling that I can't express, but I remember, and yeah, it's one of those things. Anyway, now my grandfather worked, and he was usually gone early in the mornings, And my grandmother, she would usually wake up around 8 o'clock in the morning. And the first thing that she would normally do, especially if us girls were trying to sleep in, is she would start playing her organ. And we would wake up to that. My oldest sister, she slept downstairs. There was a bedroom downstairs in the basement / garage, and she got to sleep down there. Me and my middle sister would sleep in the second bedroom, which was across from the main bedroom. And yeah, my grandmother would start playing the organ, and that pretty much got us up. Now, the way that their house was, it was a tri-level. My grandfather built it, and it was a beautiful house. So the living room had this big, huge window in it. And on each side of the window was a little window that you could unlatch and open up to bring in fresh air. But one thing I need to tell you about my grandmother, she was a stickler. You didn't touch things because she didn't want to have to clean up fingerprints. So you didn't touch the window at all. You didn't touch the screen door because the screen door was window. And so basically we learned very quickly, you don't touch anything because grandma would be very upset if you did. But yeah, we would have really great times the 2 months that we were there. The couple of stories I wanted to share with you, though, is with not only me and my sisters, but our cousins. Now, when our cousins were involved, it was like a party, literally. But before I actually start telling you about this story, a couple other things I wanted to bring up was that my grandmother, she was very, very strict. So one thing that we had to agree to and follow is that if we were to go outside, we had to let her know where we were, and we could not go into the pastures or the forest without her knowledge of it. That was one thing. We were not allowed to ride the ponies without her being there. Now, as a child, you know, kids are kids. We do things that we know we're not supposed to do. But as an adult, you look back and you're like, you know what? I can see that point. Yeah, we did some things that we probably shouldn't have done. But I wanted to bring that up because of the stories that I'm going to tell you. One incident, my grandmother had absolutely no idea that we went into the forest. Yeah, me and my sister got in a lot of trouble. The second incident, though, she was aware of that. She wasn't upset with us. No. Hundreds of very angry hornets were upset with us. So that's a whole different story. And I'm going to share with you those two stories, as well as one other story that is kind of funny. So the first story I'm going to tell you about is the hornets. Yeah. I was 8 years old when this happened, and we told our grandma, you know, we're going to go into the forest, we're going to play follow the leader. And as I said, I was 8 years old. I was the third to the youngest out of the group. So there was me, my two sisters, so there's three, my cousin Candace, and then my cousin Rob and my cousin Mikey. And because me and Mikey were the shortest, we always were the tail end of the follow the leader. Never failed. We were always the tail end. So we're walking through the forest, and my oldest sister was getting kind of upset with us because we were kind of holding up the line, and she kept telling us, you know, you guys need to pick up the speed. And so we did. We tried to catch up with them and make sure that we weren't falling too far behind. Now, at one point, I noticed that my sister and the rest of them were jumping over this fallen tree. And to be honest with you, it wasn't very big, but it was big enough for me to sit there and look at that and go, no, I'm not jumping over that because I'll probably not make it. And yeah, I probably fall right on my face. So I decided not to jump over the log. I decided to step on top of it and go over it that way. Big mistake, because I had no idea that there was a hornet's nest in that log. So as I stepped on the log, I went into complete shock, because at this point I can't tell you what I remember because I don't remember anything. I can only tell you what was told to me. So I stepped on the log. I immediately leashed out hell from these hornets. They were all over me. And my cousin Mikey was behind me, and he's screaming at all of my cousins and my sisters because he needed them to see what was happening. And eventually they all turned around and noticed that I was, one, frozen stiff on this log and wasn't moving, and I was completely swarmed. I had hornets all over me, and my cousin said my oldest sister started running towards me and screaming at me to move. And I don't remember this part at all, but I didn't move. So she came up and grabbed me. So by grabbing me, she ended up getting stung herself. Now she's pulling me out and she's yelling at me to run. And she's running. Everybody else in the group was already halfway through the forest trying to get out of there, because as we started running, the hornets decided that that wasn't enough. They needed to get revenge for me stepping and crushing their home. So they followed us through the trees. And as we were running, my middle sister, Kim, she ran through the trees and into the opening, and as she was getting closer and closer to the fence, she noticed that my grandmother was out watering her flowers. My grandmother had this beautiful, beautiful flower garden, and she would water it every day. So my sister's just running, and she's screaming at my grandma saying, "Grandma, Grandma, help, help, help." And she looked over finally, because we were so far away from her, she couldn't hear us. But at one point she did. And she looked towards my sister, and my sister was pointing at the rest of us that were coming out. And here's me and my oldest sister, Tammy, dragging me along, and she was still yelling at me to run. And my grandmother noticed that. And then as she noticed that, she also noticed this swarm of bees following us through the trees. And she's like, oh my gosh, you know. And my grandmother just started screaming at my sister, run towards the water. So she's got the water on full spray, and she's no longer watering the plants. She's just watering the grass at this point. And my middle sister, Kim, left the gate open, even though the ponies and the cows could probably go through the gate, but they left the gate open so that we could all run through it. And as we were running through it, here comes the bees. They're all following us. And my grandmother's had that water just spraying. And then as we were going through the gate, she was screaming at us to run towards the water. So that's what we did. And when my sister Tammy pulled me through the water, that's when the bees decided, nope, we've had enough of this. We're going back to our crushed home, and hopefully we can salvage what's left. Meanwhile, I was just covered in bee stings. And my grandmother's like, oh my gosh. She looked at me and she says, well, I think we're going to have to take you into the bathroom, and we're going to draw up a lukewarm bath water. And I'm going to call the doctor and see if there's something that I need to do in regards to all these bee stings, because they were all over my legs, my arms, my neck. Luckily, my face was not attacked, although I did have 2 stingers, one on the lower right side of my lip and one on the upper left side of my lip. So she draws up this lukewarm bath water and pours in this white powder. I wasn't sure what it was at the time. And she told me to put the face cloth and just dab it on my arms and my shoulders and around my neck. And I did that, and she was on the phone with the doctor. So basically the doctor told her that she needed to make sure all of the bee stingers were out, and that she would have to apply like alcohol or hydrogen peroxide to make sure that it doesn't get infected. My grandmother asked him, listen, I currently have her in the bathtub in lukewarm water with baking soda. Is that going to be enough? And he said, well, that will actually help draw out the stingers out of her skin if they're still there. But no, you're still going to have to use some type of anesthetic to clean out the areas where the stinger was. And she's, my grandmother, just love her to death. She says, well, would chlorine work? I guess the doctor kind of went, what? She says, well, if I put her in the pool, would that work? And he goes, well, yeah, chlorine will pretty much clean out anything. So my grandmother had me sit in the tub for, I would say, 30 minutes. And then she got me out. She carefully dried me and said, get your swimsuit on, you're going in the pool. Everybody else was in the pool, and I was kind of distraught because I wanted to go in the pool too. So I was really happy that she said I can go in the pool. So I got my swimsuit on and I got in the pool, and I must have been in there for about an hour. Finally, she called us up and said, you guys need to come out of the pool. It's time to eat dinner. So we all got out of the pool, and my grandmother was like really looking me over to make sure that she didn't see any stingers or anything like that. The doctor also advised her that she needed to keep an eye on me just in case I had an allergic reaction. So I'm assuming that's what she was really looking out for. And anyway, we had our supper, and just like any other night, we sat down, watched TV until about 8 o'clock. And then my grandmother's like, okay, girls, you guys have to go brush your teeth and get ready for bed. And so we did. My grandmother checked my temperature. She made sure I was doing okay, that I wasn't sore. I was a little bit sore, to be honest with you, but I don't think I was overly sore, because I would remember that definitely. But so she tucked us into bed, gave us kisses. We had to do our prayers. She always made sure that we did our prayers, and we went to sleep. The next morning I woke up, and my hands, my arms, my shoulders, my legs, my feet were super swollen, and I had a fat lip on both of my lips. So on the upper left hand side I had a fat lip, and on the lower right hand side I had a fat lip where I got stung, but everywhere else I was fine. Everywhere that I was stung is where it was swollen. And she was like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? So she called the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, put her back in the pool, and the cool water will help, take away the swelling. And it did. She let me, I don't think I ever went swimming that early in the morning, but she put me in the pool, and I was probably out there for about another hour, and came back and the swelling was gone. By saying that, though, I am now highly allergic to bees. I see a bee and I flip out. I literally will flip out. And Mr. Review is like, would you stop? Just leave the bee alone. He is not going to hurt you unless you start swatting after him. And I'm like, no. Sorry, I cannot sit still. If I know there's a bee anywhere in sight, I don't care if it's a hornet, a yellow jacket, a wasp, I'm out of there. I am not sticking around to find out if he's friendly or not. So, yeah, after that experience, no bees for me. In fact, there's one time I was driving my car. Me and my ex-husband were moving back from Idaho to Washington State, and I was driving the car, he was driving the U-Haul, And I pulled over on the middle of the highway. I just pulled right over and jumped out of the car. I didn't care if I was going to get hit by a car. I jumped out, and he pulled over behind me, and he's looking at me. He goes, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "There's a bee in the car." And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "What do you mean? There's a bee in the car." And he's like, "So you're going to risk your life over a bee?" "Yes, I am. I'm sorry. No, get it out." So it took him about 15 minutes to get the bee out of the car. And you know what? He let him out. He didn't kill him. I'm like, "Why did you not kill the bee?" And he's like, "Do you think the bee really wanted to be in the car?" I'm like, "I don't care if that bee wanted to be in the car or not. You should have killed him. That's one less bee I have to worry about." And he just shook his head, got back in the truck. It's like, okay, I'm so sorry. And my coworker thought it was hilarious. A couple of years ago, we were outside and enjoying the sun, and it was in September where the bees usually like to come out. And she saw how quickly I can move when I see a bee floating around, and she would just shake her head and look at me, and she's like, "Jene, what is wrong with you?" I said, "I'm sorry, it's a bee." And she goes, "But it isn't going to hurt you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's what they all say." No, thank you. So that was the angry bee story. And like I said, my grandmother wasn't mad at us, but those bees were. So, now the next story I'm going to share with you is about the pool. Now this pool was not an in-ground pool. It was one of the above-ground pools. But my grandfather, when it was put in, he made sure that they dug like a trench for it. So it actually did get quite deep. I believe the deepest part of the pool was around 12 feet. My grandmother, she's the one that taught us how to swim. And her way of teaching us how to swim was, we're going to put this life belt on you. Now, it wasn't a life jacket. It was a life belt. So it just went around your waist. It kept you afloat, but you still had to kick and you still had to use your arms. So her version of teaching us girls how to swim was put that belt on and toss us in the deep part of the pool and say, "Okay, start kicking your legs and start moving your arms." That's how she taught us how to swim. It worked, but yeah, it wasn't the most conventional way of doing it, but it did work. Anyway, we used to have these contests between all the cousins, and the contest was who can do the biggest, the baddest, and the loudest belly flop. And my cousin Rob was king of the belly floppers. Oh, I'm not kidding you. He would literally jump up in the air and then spread his legs and his arms out like he was going to be put on a cross or something. He'd be completely parallel to the water and flat. And then boom, and the water just would go flying. And sorry, I'm laughing. And we would just sit there and cringe because we knew that had to hurt. But he would always come out of the water laughing. He would just laugh. Needless to say, he was like as red as a lobster from the water hitting him so hard. But he would just laugh, and every year he would always outdo us. But that was one thing that we used to do in the pool. But the other thing that we did was called Around the World. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but Around the World in a pool is all of you would go in the same motion. So we'd go around the pool like this, okay? And we would continue to do that as fast as we can. And what would happen is the current would start going around just as you were. It would get so strong at one point that you could actually lift up your legs and you would float around. You wouldn't even have to move. You would just float around. The problem with this, though, was one, My grandfather had this tube that would go up and over and into the pool, and it would actually suck out the water, recycle it, and then put it back in. Now, it used to have this basket, and you could see it just kind of bobbling around, right? But sometimes he wouldn't have the basket on there. And heaven forbid if that basket wasn't on there. Oh, believe me, if you were close to it, it would suck you up in there and it hurt. I've had many a times where that tube, we called it the sucker, would suck up my arm and get me right in the soft spot. And I'd have these big circular bruises there. Yeah, it wasn't fun, but we enjoyed doing around the world in this pool. Regardless, we would have to make sure that we walked around the sucker though, because we didn't want to get sucked up by the sucker. But anyway, after we got the current so strong, then the key was to turn around and start walking the opposite direction. Yeah, that was interesting because I'll tell you, you kind of walked in place for about 5 minutes because that current would be so strong that you couldn't move. You were just basically stuck there. My grandmother wasn't too keen on this because she was afraid that eventually the walls of the pool would cave in from the pressure. So we didn't do it all the time, but when we did it, oh, it was fun. It was fun. Now, there was a couple of times that I didn't enjoy going in the pool, and one of the reasons why is because my uncle, who has passed, but he would go swimming with us, and I don't know what it was about him, but he thought it was fun to dunk us kids and hold us down at least a minute. And there was a couple of times where he did that to me, and I literally freaked out. So I just wouldn't go in the pool with him. That was probably the only time that I was afraid to ever go swimming, as if my Uncle Bob was there. And I don't think he did it, to be mean or nasty. I think he thought it was funny, but to be honest, no, that wasn't funny at all. In fact, it really scared It scared me. I don't know about my other two sisters, but for me, it was terrifying when you had to go in the pool with Uncle Bob. So that was another thing that we would do. And we always had a great time when the cousins came over. We just had a ball every time they would. If it wasn't just swimming. Oh, there's another story I got to tell you too. If it wasn't swimming or follow the leader, there was one other thing, or actually a few other things that we used to do. One of them was we would build forts or teepees out of fallen trees. And we would go into the barn and we would grab the tarps and tapestries that my grandfather had back there. So we would get the longest poles that we could find or fallen trees, and we'd start making these teepees. So what we would do is we would grab fern along the way. We'd just pull it out of the ground and we'd start piling it up. Now my clip is going to end in just a second, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and as I was saying, we would grab the tarps, get as many of the down trees as we could, and we'd start forming the frame for the teepee, and then we'd also start pulling out fern out of the ground so that we can use that as bedding for the inside of the teepee. We always had a little bit of space. Let me grab some color here. Just a second here. Here we go. But we always had a little bit of space between the tarp and the ground. So we would take the fern and we would put it around the base of the teepee just so that it would be completely enclosed. Now, the problem with that idea, and we learned this quite quickly, is the cows enjoy eating fern. So we would spend all day putting this teepee together and put the fern down. we would have to go in the house, eat supper, and we'd go back out and the cows had eaten all the fern. And we're like, okay, how do we keep the cows from eating the fern? So what we decided to do was grab some electric wire that my grandfather had for the fence, and we made the cows think that the wire was connected to the rest of the fencing that they had around their property. And that lasted for a couple of days. The cows were smart. They kind of figured out that, yeah, there's no electric current going through that wire, so we're just going to plow right through it and eat that fern. So we had to figure out another way to keep the cows out, and basically we had to find enough wire so that we could actually connect it to the fence, because we didn't want the cows to continually destroy our hard work and effort on those teepees. Once they realized the fence was on, yeah, they stayed away from it. So the ponies would stay away from it. They usually didn't eat fern, and fern was actually not good for horses anyway. So yeah, we weren't worried about the ponies at all. But the cows, they seemed to eat anything. And yeah. So once we got our teepees up and, you know, had our little forts and whatnot, then we would start playing. And I kind of debated on if I was going to tell you this story or not, but I think it's quite funny. So yeah, it might be a little gross. So just in case, just warning you. We used to have what we called cow pie fights. Now, for you, those of you that don't know what a cow pie is, it's a desk. It looks like a desk or a pie, but it's actually cow poop. And we would take sticks. We wouldn't like physically handle them, but we would take sticks and we would fling them or flick them towards each other. And we would spend hours doing that. My grandmother would just watch us and shake her head like, what are you kids doing? And then, of course, as soon as we stopped doing that, she would instantly tell us, get your swimsuits on and go in the pool, because she didn't want us coming in the house. But yeah, we used to do that a lot too. But this last story I'm going to tell you is about my sister Kim. Now, she is the middle one in the family, and she always seemed to get herself in a lot of trouble. It wasn't just her. She always managed to get me in trouble on top of that. Yeah, like I'm a little angel by my little halos tilting off to the side right now. But this incident, I did not want to participate in this because I knew something was going to happen. And if it was going to happen, my grandmother would find out about it, and I didn't want to get in trouble. So I kept telling my sister no. And what she wanted to do, she wanted to grab the ponies. Again, the rule was we were not to ride the ponies without my grandmother there. So that was rule number 1 broken. So she wanted to grab the ponies and then ride them in the forest. Rule number 2 broken. And, you know, she was like, you know, we can do this really fast and really quick. Grandma went grocery shopping, so let's just grab the ponies and let's just do a trail ride in the forest. And I'm like, okay, you know we're not supposed to go back there, and you know we're not supposed to be on the ponies without Grandma knowing about it or being here. Now, my grandmother went grocery shopping, so she left us alone for a few hours. But my sister Kim, she was adamant. She wanted to get Flicka, which was one of the ponies, and she was the one that was the most high-strung of the 3 ponies. She wanted to grab Flicka, and she's like, let's just do a quick trail ride. Grandma's not going to know about it. It's no big deal. Come on. So I finally caved in. I shouldn't have, though, but I did. So we got the ponies. We got their bridles on. We were riding them bareback. And we started heading into the trees. Now, as we were going through the trees, and we were just at a walk. We weren't like racing them through there. We were just walking. My sister would turn back and she would start talking to me. And I'm like, you really need to pay attention to what you're doing, because Flicka was a very unpredictable. You just never knew what was going on in her little mind. And I think that's the reason why my sister loved her so much, is because she was so unpredictable. But anyway, I kept telling her, I said, you need to keep your eyes forward. Don't keep talking to me, because if something were to happen and Flicka gets spooked, you're going to fall, and I don't know what to do if something were to happen to you seriously. So she was kind of, okay, in fact, she called me a worrywart. Yeah, I had every right to be worried. So anyway, she turned and we went a little bit further and a little bit deeper into the trees. And I don't know why, but all of a sudden she turned around. She stopped Flicka. She turned around to look at me and she started telling me something, and Flicka got spooked. When Flicka spooked, she went forward and underneath a tree that was kind of in a curved formation, and the limbs of that tree were hanging down. This tree had been like that for years, so this was a very dry, dead tree. And Flicka flipped out and decided that she was going to go underneath that tree and take off with my sister on her. So they went through the tree, and all I can think of is, oh boy, hopefully she was okay. So I took my pony and we went around the tree that was down, the tree that she actually went through. And my sister Kim was laughing, and I'm like, what are you laughing about? And she says, well, I'm just going to let you know that everything is okay, and no big deal, don't panic. And as she's saying this, she turned around to look at me, and I'm like, in pure horror of what I saw. She had blood all over her right cheek. And I thought, oh, that doesn't look good. I said, you know what? I said, I think we better go back to the house. And she says, why? She says, what's going on? And I said, Kim, you have a lot of blood on your cheek, and you're laughing thinking this is funny. It's not funny. Your cheek is just gushing blood. And she's like, oh, it can't really be that bad. So she picked up her hand and she started wiping the blood off of her face. When she did that, it kind of shifted her cheek a little bit. And I went from horrified to I wanted to scream. It was just horrible. She looked at me and she says, what's the matter? And I said, your cheek is actually like, I can see a chunk of flesh. She says, what are you talking about? And I said, no, it's bad. I said, we need to go back to the house. And I said, your shirt is covered in blood. She was wearing a white t-shirt that had a little bit of blue lettering on it, but her white t-shirt was just soaked in blood. And she looked down and she's like, oh yeah, I think we better go back. So we headed on back. And as we got closer to the house and closer to where we could see the garage of the house, guess what was in front of the garage? My grandmother's car. So my grandmother is now home, and we're on the ponies, which we're not supposed to be on. And we also were coming out of the trees. So I thought, oh boy. Luckily for us at that time, she was in the kitchen putting groceries away. So she didn't see us coming through the trees or that we were on the ponies. So I told my sister, I said, Kim, you need to get into the house and you need to wash your cheek and do something about that. I said, because like I said, you could see the cut was so deep that you could actually see flesh from her cheek. It was just, oh, it was gross. Anyway, we get into the house and my grandmother was in the kitchen. She's putting her groceries away. And I go into the kitchen and I asked her if she wanted any help. And she said, sure. So I'm helping her with the groceries, hoping that my sister's cleaning her face and that my grandmother won't notice the fact that her face is cut. My grandmother asked me, she says, well, where's your sister? And I said, well, she's in the bathroom. Well, what is she doing there? And I said, well, she's cleaning her face. Cleaning her face? Well, why would she need to clean her face? What were you kids doing? Oh, we were playing, you know, out in the side there by the barn. White lies, right? Yeah. I had to make up some story, right? Anyway, she says, well, just tell your sister to come in here and let me take a look and see what happened. So I went to the bathroom and there's my sister trying to clean the blood off of her face. Unfortunately, the more she cleaned it, the more it bled. So I'm looking at her and I said, you need to put something on there. And I said, change your shirt. So she goes in the room, changes her shirt, and puts toilet paper on her cheek to try to stop the bleeding, right? So she goes into the kitchen and she starts talking to my grandmother, and my grandmother looked at her and she said, what do you got toilet paper on your face for? And she says, well, I cut myself and it just doesn't want to stop bleeding. And she says, well, you come over here. Let me take a look at it. And believe me, I'm thinking, we're dead. We're dead. She's going to kill us. So my grandmother took off the toilet paper and stood back there for a few minutes. And she's like, where were you kids? And what in the world were you doing? And so my sister's trying to explain to her that we just had a little bit of a mishap, you know, by the barn. No big deal. And my grandmother's like, no, that isn't the truth. Now, my grandmother could read me really well, and she knew that I was hiding something from her. So she looked at me and she says, okay, what happened? And I looked at her and I said, well, Kim wanted to go on a trail ride. And so when you left, we grabbed ponies and we got them, you know, got their bits and we started riding. And she's like, you kids aren't supposed to be on these ponies when we're not here. Because we were probably about maybe 10 and 11 years of age. So I'm like, I know. I said, but, you know, she told me that it was going to be okay, that we would, you know, it wouldn't be that bad. And with you being gone, going grocery shopping, we just go a couple of rounds and we'll be off the ponies before you get home. And my grandmother was just tapping her foot. So I'm like, uh-oh. She looked at my sister, Kim, and she says, can you please explain to me what happened? Because obviously I'm not going to get it from your sister, because I was scared to death at this point. So Kim finally spilled the beans and told her that she convinced me to go with her on the ponies into the forest. Now, my grandmother was semi-patient up until this point. She was like, what? And so she repeated it. She's like, okay, you're going to have to go to the doctor's. That is not just a scratch. That is a deep cut. You're going to have to get stitches. Oh, the gates of tears opened up because my sister just started bawling because she did not want stitches. And my grandmother's like, you know what? This is your fault. You should never have gone into the trees. I've told you that before. This is the reason why. Meanwhile, my grandmother was getting her purse and, you know, getting everything ready to go. She looks at me and she says, and you get your butt into that bedroom right now and you stay in there until I get back. I'm like, okay. So I didn't argue. I just went in there. I don't know where my older sister was at the time. I think she might have been with one of our other cousins, but she wasn't around. So I went into the bedroom and I sat there. I didn't know what to do. My grandmother and my sister goes to the doctor's. About an hour later, my grandfather comes home from work. There's no dinner. There's no grandma, and Kim is missing. And he comes into the bedroom and he looks at me and he goes, "Where's your sister and where's grandma?" And I'm like, "Well, grandma took Kim to the doctor's." And he says, "Well, why did she take Kim to the doctor's?" And I said, "Well, Kim and I decided that we were going to ride the ponies in the forest when Grandma was out grocery shopping, and Flicka got spooked and took her underneath a tree, and it cut her cheek open." And my grandfather was like, his mouth dropped open. He was like, "You kids aren't supposed to be doing that." And I'm like, I know, and I'm really sorry. And I kept telling him, "I'm really, really sorry." And he's like, "Well, hopefully your grandma comes home soon because, you know, we're supposed to be eating dinner." Anyway, she came home about maybe 30 minutes after that. And she had stopped off and got dinner for us on the way home. And sure enough, my sister ended up having 6 stitches. And to this day, you can still see that scar that she had from that particular incident. We haven't let her forget about it either. So, kids will be kids. You know, we do things that wish we could forget and things that we treasure as far as memories are concerned. So, yeah. If I could have taken that day back, I would have. Believe me. Anyway, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and end it at that. I hope you enjoyed the stories and some of the corny things that we did when we were kids and some of the things that I wish I could forget. Yes. By saying that, everyone, I hope that you all have a wonderful New Year's and the best to all of you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and watching the video. Take care, everyone, and God bless. Bye for now.